She threw my grandmother's ashes on the ground and laughed in my face while the entire neighborhood watched in silence. That is how I learned what it means to be hated for existing, for breathing, for daring to own a home in a place where people like me were never supposed to belong. Her name was Patricia Whitmore, and she stood on my front lawn like she owned the entire world, her bleached blonde hair catching the afternoon sun, her designer sunglasses pushed up on her forehead, her manicured finger pointed directly at my chest while her voice echoed off every house on the street. She was the president of the Homeowners Association, and in her mind she was the president of reality itself. "You do not belong here," she screamed, her voice cutting through the humid summer air like a blade designed specifically for humiliation. "Your kind never belonged here, and you never will." I stood frozen on my own front porch, holding the small decorative urn that contained the remains of the woman who raised me, the woman who taught me to read, the woman who saved every penny so that one day I might have a life better than hers. Patricia had marched up to my door because she claimed the urn was a violation of Section 12, subsection 3 of the Homeowners Association guidelines regarding outdoor decorations. But we both knew this was never about an urn. This was never about guidelines. This was about the color of my skin and the audacity I had shown by purchasing a home in Meadowbrook Estates, a neighborhood where Patricia Whitmore had ruled unchallenged for over 15 years. She snatched the urn from my hands before I could react. Her speed was shocking for a woman of her age, fueled by a rage that seemed to consume her entire being. She held it up, inspected it like it was garbage she had found in a dumpster, and then she looked me dead in the eyes with a smile that I will never forget as long as I live. "This," she said, shaking the urn in my face, "is exactly what I would expect from someone like you. Cheap, tacky, absolutely disgusting." And then she dropped it. She opened her fingers and let the urn fall onto the concrete walkway where it shattered into 100 pieces, sending the ashes of my grandmother scattering across my own front lawn, while Patricia Whitmore stood there with her hands on her hips like she had just won a championship. The neighbors watched from their porches and their windows. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They had been trained by years of Patricia's tyranny to remain silent, to never interfere, to pretend they saw nothing because crossing Patricia Whitmore meant becoming her next target. I dropped to my knees, trying desperately to gather the ashes with my bare hands, tears streaming down my face, my throat too tight to even scream. And Patricia just watched me grovel in the remains of my own grandmother, and she laughed. She actually laughed. "You look pathetic," she said. "This is exactly how people like you end up. On your knees in the dirt where you belong. If your grandmother had any sense, she would have taught you to stay in your own neighborhood instead of crawling into ours like some kind of infestation." My hands were shaking so hard I could barely close my fingers around the ash. I could feel the grit of it mixing with my tears, mixing with the concrete dust, mixing with every ounce of humiliation Patricia was forcing into my body. I looked up at her, this woman who had decided I was her enemy the moment she saw me move in, and I saw nothing behind her eyes. Nothing human. Just cold, calculated cruelty wrapped in a cashmere sweater and pearl earrings. But what Patricia Whitmore did not know, what she could not possibly have known, was that the woman whose ashes she had just scattered across my lawn had raised more than just me. My grandmother had raised a family of fighters, of survivors, of people who had spent generations being told they did not belong and had proven everyone wrong. And the phone in my pocket was connected to one of those people, someone Patricia had never met, someone whose name she did not know, someone who at that very moment was listening to every single word through the call I had discreetly placed the moment Patricia had stepped onto my property. This is the story of how Patricia Whitmore destroyed herself by underestimating the person she despised most. This is the story of how I went from crying on my knees to watching justice unfold in ways that Patricia never saw coming. And this is the story of how my grandmother, even in death, taught me that some battles are not won with fists, but with patience, with truth, and with the unshakable knowledge that bullies always fall when they finally meet someone who refuses to break. Let me take you back to where this all began, to the day I first drove through the iron gates of Meadowbrook Estates and felt my heart swell with a pride I had never experienced before. I was 32 years old, and I had just closed on my first home. Not an apartment, not a rental, not a room in someone else's house, but an actual home with my name on the deed, purchased with money I had earned through years of working 2 jobs, attending night school, and never giving up even when the world seemed designed to keep me exactly where I started. My grandmother had passed away 3 months before the closing date, and I knew in my heart that she was the reason I had made it this far. She had raised me alone after my mother died when I was 7 and my father disappeared into a world of addiction that eventually claimed his life as well. My grandmother had never let me use those tragedies as excuses. She had pushed me, sometimes gently and sometimes with the kind of tough love that left bruises on my pride. She told me every single day that I was capable of greatness, that the circumstances of my birth did not define the possibilities of my future, and that one day I would prove everyone wrong who had ever doubted me. When I pulled into the driveway of my new home for the first time, I sat in my car and cried for 20 minutes. I wished she could see it. I wished she could walk through the rooms with me, could stand on the back patio and watch the sunset, could sit in the kitchen where I would cook her favorite meals. But she was gone, and all I had left of her was the small urn I had kept by my bedside since the funeral, the urn I had placed on my front porch as a tribute, as a reminder that she was always with me even when I felt most alone. The neighborhood was beautiful in that carefully manufactured way that expensive developments always are. Every lawn was precisely the same shade of green. Every mailbox was the same approved design. Every house followed a strict color palette that had been selected by committee and enforced with religious devotion. I noticed the uniformity immediately, but I told myself it was a small price to pay for safety, for community, for finally belonging somewhere. I noticed Patricia Whitmore within the first hour. She appeared on my front porch before I had even finished unloading my moving truck, her smile so wide it looked painful, her handshake so firm it felt like a warning. "Welcome to Meadowbrook," she said, her eyes scanning me from head to toe in a way that made me feel like I was being appraised at auction. "I am Patricia Whitmore, president of the Homeowners Association." She handed me a thick binder filled with rules and regulations, her perfectly manicured nail tapping the cover with each word. "Everything you need to know is in here. Every rule, every regulation, every expectation. I suggest you read it thoroughly. We have standards here, and we expect everyone to meet them." The emphasis she placed on the word everyone felt strange, but I dismissed it. I was being paranoid, I told myself. I was letting my past experiences color my perception of someone who was probably just thorough, just dedicated, just protective of her community. I thanked her, promised to read every page, and watched her walk back across the street to her own home, which was the largest on the block, positioned at the exact center of the cul-de-sac like a throne overlooking its subjects. The first violation notice arrived 3 days later. It was tucked into my mailbox in an official envelope bearing the Meadowbrook Estates logo, and it informed me that my garbage cans had been visible from the street for 17 minutes past the approved window on collection day. The fine was $75. I paid it without complaint, assuming it was a one-time oversight, assuming I simply needed to be more careful. The second notice came a week after that. My grass, apparently, was 1/4 inch above the maximum permitted height. Another fine, then my car was parked 6 inches too close to the sidewalk. Another fine, then my curtains were the wrong shade of white, visible from the street and therefore in violation of the aesthetic guidelines. Another fine. Each time Patricia delivered the notice personally. Each time she smiled that same painful smile and reminded me that standards existed for a reason, and that perhaps I was not accustomed to living in a place with such high expectations. Each time I noticed the way her eyes lingered on my skin, on my hair, on my features, and each time I pushed the thought away because acknowledging it would mean admitting something I was not ready to face. It was my neighbor Marcus who finally said what I had been refusing to hear. He was an older man, retired military, one of the few other people of color in the entire development. He had lived in Meadowbrook for almost 10 years, and he had watched Patricia's reign with the quiet resignation of someone who had learned that some battles cost more than they were worth. "She is never going to stop," he told me one evening as we stood at the edge of his lawn, our voices low so the wind would not carry them to the wrong ears. "She has done this before. Every time someone like us moves in, she finds ways to make life unbearable until they leave. She calls herself a guardian of property values, but we both know what she really means." I wanted to argue with him. I wanted to believe that I was overthinking, that Patricia was simply a perfectionist, that her targeting of me was coincidental rather than calculated. But deep in my stomach, I felt the truth of his words settling like stones. I had moved to Meadowbrook to escape the struggles of my past, to build a future in a place where I could finally breathe. But Patricia Whitmore had looked at me on that very first day and decided that I did not deserve to breathe her air, walk on her streets, or exist in her carefully constructed world. And she was going to make me pay for the crime of existing until I finally gave up and left. The escalation happened gradually and then all at once. Patricia seemed to sense that the fines alone were not breaking me, that I was paying them without complaint and continuing to exist in my home as if I had every right to be there. This infuriated her in ways that became increasingly visible, increasingly personal, increasingly dangerous. The whisper campaign started first. I began noticing that neighbors who had initially waved at me now looked away when I passed. Parents who had smiled at me from their driveways now pulled their children inside when they saw me approaching. The invitations to block parties and neighborhood gatherings that I had received in my first week suddenly stopped, and when I asked Marcus about an upcoming community picnic, he looked at me with pity in his eyes and told me I had been removed from the mailing list. "She is telling people things," he said quietly. "Lies about your background, about where you came from, about the kind of person you are. She says you have a criminal record, that you are dangerous, that you are lowering property values just by living here. She says your family is trash and that you were raised by trash and that trash is all you will ever be." The words hit me like physical blows. My grandmother, the woman who had sacrificed everything for me, was being slandered by someone who had never met her, who had never sat at her kitchen table, who had never heard her sing hymns while she cooked Sunday dinner. My grandmother, who had worked 3 jobs to keep food on our table, who had attended every parent-teacher conference even when she was exhausted, who had held me through every nightmare and dried every tear, was being called trash by a woman who had never earned anything in her entire privileged life. I confronted Patricia the next day. I walked across the street to her perfect porch with her perfect potted plants and her perfect welcome mat, and I rang her doorbell with a finger that trembled with barely contained rage. She answered with that smile, that terrible smile that never reached her eyes. "Can I help you? I heard what you have been telling people about me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I heard what you said about my family, and I am here to tell you that it stops now." Patricia tilted her head like a cat examining a mouse that had suddenly tried to fight back. "I am sure I do not know what you mean. You called my grandmother trash." She raised her eyebrows in mock confusion. "I said no such thing. But honestly, sweetheart, can you blame people for making assumptions? Look at you. Look at where you come from. You do not exactly scream quality, do you?" I felt the blood drain from my face. "Excuse me." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt louder than any shout. "Your hair looks like you cut it yourself. Your clothes look like they came from a clearance rack at a discount store. Your car is at least 10 years old, and every time you drive past my house I can hear it struggling like a dying animal. You do not belong here, you never did. And no matter how hard you try to pretend otherwise, everyone can see it. Everyone knows it. You are not one of us. You are poor, you are common. You are exactly what your family made you, and no fancy new address is going to change that." I could not speak. I could not breathe. She was saying out loud every insecurity I had ever carried, every doubt I had ever felt, every fear that had whispered to me in the dark when I wondered if I truly deserved the life I was trying to build. She was reaching into my soul and squeezing, but she was not finished. "Your mother," Patricia continued, her voice dripping with full sympathy. "I heard she died young, probably for the best, honestly. Can you imagine the shame of watching your daughter turn out like this? Living in a house she clearly cannot afford, surrounded by people who will never accept her, pretending she is something she is not. And your father," she laughed softly. "Well, we both know what happened there. The apple does not fall far from the tree, does it?" That is when I understood. This was not about rules or regulations or property values. This was about power. This was about a woman who had spent her entire life believing she was superior, and who saw my very existence as a challenge to that belief. She needed to destroy me because my success threatened the narrative she had built about people like me, and she would say anything, do anything, hurt anyone to protect that narrative. The breaking point came at the annual Homeowners Association meeting. Patricia had insisted I attend, had personally delivered the reminder notice to my door with that smile that I now recognized as a predator's grin. "Everyone will be there," she had said. "It is important that you understand how things work in this community." I walked into the community center that evening with my head held high, wearing the nicest outfit I owned, determined to show Patricia and everyone else that I would not be intimidated. The room was filled with residents, most of whom avoided my eyes as I found a seat in the back row. Patricia stood at the front, behind a podium, looking every inch the queen of her tiny kingdom. The meeting began with the usual business: budget reports, maintenance schedules, upcoming events. I sat quietly taking notes, trying to appear engaged even as I felt the tension radiating from every corner of the room. And then Patricia's tone shifted. "Before we adjourn," she said, "there is one more matter we need to discuss. A matter of community standards and the importance of maintaining the character of our neighborhood." She looked directly at me. "As many of you know, we have had some concerns about one of our newer residents. Concerns about their adherence to our guidelines, their respect for our traditions, their overall fit within the Meadowbrook community." I felt my stomach drop. She was doing this publicly in front of everyone, making me the subject of a trial I had not agreed to and could not escape. "I have received numerous complaints," Patricia continued, "and I believe it is time we address them openly and honestly." She turned to face me fully. Perhaps our new neighbor would like to speak to these concerns, explain why they seem so determined to disrupt our way of life. Every eye in the room was on me. Some looked sympathetic, most looked curious, a few looked openly hostile. I stood slowly, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples. I have not disrupted anything, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. I have paid every fine you have sent me, followed every rule in your binder, and done everything possible to be a good neighbor. Patricia laughed. A good neighbor? She gestured around the room. Is that what you call it when you bring down property values simply by existing? When you lower the tone of an entire community just by walking down the street? When your very presence makes people uncomfortable in their own neighborhood? I tried to respond, but she was not finished. Look at yourself, she continued. Look at what you are wearing right now. That outfit probably cost less than my sunglasses. Your hair, your skin, your everything screams that you do not belong here. People like you have your own places to live, your own communities, your own kind. Why do you insist on forcing yourself into ours? The room was silent. Not a single person spoke up. Not a single person challenged her. They sat there, these neighbors who had waved at me when I first arrived, and they let Patricia tear me apart piece by piece. Your grandmother, Patricia said, her voice softening to that false sympathetic tone I had heard before. I heard you keep her ashes on your porch. That is so sad, really. So pathetic. You cling to the dead because you have nothing in the living world. No family that matters, no friends who want you, no community that accepts you. Just an urn full of dust and the delusion that you belong somewhere you clearly do not. I felt the tears coming and I hated myself for it. I hated that she could see them, that everyone could see them, that I was proving her right by breaking down in front of people who already thought I was weak. But then something shifted, something inside me that I did not know existed until that moment. It was my grandmother's voice, clear as day, echoing in my memory. You are not what they say you are. You are what you decide to be. And no one has the power to take that from you unless you give it to them. I wiped my eyes, I squared my shoulders, and I looked Patricia Whitmore directly in her cold, cruel eyes. Are you finished? I asked. She blinked, clearly not expecting resistance, because I have something to say. And everyone in this room is going to hear it. The room fell completely silent. Patricia's face flickered with something I had never seen before, a flash of uncertainty that she quickly buried beneath her usual mask of superiority. She crossed her arms and raised one perfectly shaped eyebrow. By all means, she said, enlighten us. I took a deep breath. I stepped out from the back row and walked toward the front of the room, toward the podium, toward Patricia herself. Each step felt like a mile, but I refused to look down, refused to show weakness, refused to give her the satisfaction of watching me cower. I stopped about 5 feet from her, close enough that she could not ignore me, far enough that I was not threatening. When I spoke, my voice was steady. My name is Maya Johnson. I am 32 years old. I work as a paralegal at a law firm downtown. I purchased my home in this community with money I earned through honest work and careful saving. I have never been arrested, never been convicted of any crime, never done anything that would justify the way I have been treated since the day I moved here. I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every neighbor who had turned away from me, every person who had believed Patricia's lies without question. The woman you are listening to has told you that I am a danger to this community. She has told you that I lower property values, that I am common, that I do not belong. She has insulted my appearance, my family, my grandmother, everything about me that she thinks makes me lesser than her. I turned back to Patricia, who was watching me with narrowed eyes. But here is what she has not told you. She has not told you about the 13 families who have left Meadowbrook Estates in the last 5 years, driven out by the same campaign of harassment she has waged against me. She has not told you about the lawsuits that were quietly settled, the complaints that were buried, the people whose lives she destroyed because they dared to be different from her perfect vision of what a neighbor should look like. Patricia's face went white. She tried to speak, but I did not let her. She has not told you that her behavior violates federal fair housing laws, that discrimination based on race is illegal, that everything she has said to me tonight could be used as evidence in a civil rights complaint. She has not told you that I have been documenting everything, every fine, every notice, every word she has spoken to me or about me since the day I moved in. Someone in the audience gasped. I continued. And she definitely has not told you that I am not just a paralegal. I work for the law firm that represents the State Fair Housing Authority. My supervising attorney, who happens to be my mentor and one of the most respected civil rights lawyers in this state, has been listening to this entire meeting. I held up my phone, the call that I had placed before walking in still active, the speaker clearly visible. She heard everything Patricia just said. Every insult, every threat, every admission of discriminatory intent, and she is very, very interested in what happens next. The room erupted. People started talking over each other, some looking horrified, some looking angry, some looking like they were desperately trying to calculate how much legal exposure they now had for sitting silently while Patricia destroyed me. Patricia herself looked like she had been slapped. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Her face was red, her hands were shaking, and for the first time since I had met her she seemed completely, utterly lost. "You cannot," she stammered. You had no right to record without, this is private property." I smiled. "Actually, this community centre is leased from the city, which makes it public property. And in this state, recording in public spaces is completely legal. But thank you for demonstrating once again that you believe the rules apply differently to you than to everyone else." The front door of the community centre opened, and a woman walked in. She was tall, impeccably dressed, her grey hair pulled back in a severe bun, her face radiating the kind of calm authority that only comes from decades of winning impossible battles. It was Margaret Chen, my supervising attorney, the woman who had taken a chance on a girl with no connections and too much determination, the woman who had become not just my mentor but my family. She walked directly to the front of the room, nodded at me, and turned to face Patricia. "Ms. Whitmore," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. "My name is Margaret Chen. I represent Maya Johnson, and I also represent the federal interests in fair housing compliance for this district. I have been listening to this meeting for the past 45 minutes, and I must say, I have rarely encountered such clear, unambiguous evidence of discriminatory intent in my entire career." Patricia looked like she might faint. "I did not," she whispered. "I never said anything about, I did not mention." Ms. Chen held up her own phone. "I have the recording. I have timestamps of every statement. I have witnesses in this room who can be subpoenaed if necessary. And I have my client, who has been subjected to a systematic campaign of harassment designed to drive her from her home solely because of her race. The penalty for fair housing violations of this magnitude can include fines of up to $100,000 per incident, mandatory diversity training, and in some cases, personal liability for board members who participated in or enabled the discrimination." Patricia looked around the room for support, for anyone who would stand with her, but every single person in that room was suddenly very interested in their shoes. The same neighbours who had been afraid to cross her, afraid to speak up, afraid to do the right thing were now watching her fall and doing nothing to stop it. "I wonder," Ms. Chen continued, "if the other members of this board understood that by allowing Ms. Whitmore to conduct this campaign of harassment, they were exposing themselves to personal liability. I wonder if they understood that silence in the face of discrimination is legally considered complicity." People started shifting in their seats. One man near the front raised his hand nervously. I did not know, I thought she was just being strict about the rules. I did not realize." Ms. Chen cut him off. "Ignorance is not a defense, but participation in the remedy can be a mitigating factor." Patricia, seeing her support evaporate, tried one last desperate gambit. She turned to me, her face twisted with fury. "You think you have won," she hissed. "You think this changes anything? You are still nothing. You are still trash. Your grandmother was trash, your mother was trash, your father was worthless, and you will never be anything more than what your blood made you. Do you hear me?" "Never." The room went completely silent. Ms. Chen raised her phone slightly. "Thank you, Ms. Whitmore. That statement will be particularly useful in establishing a pattern of discriminatory animus." I walked toward Patricia, stopping so close that I could see every line in her face, every crack in the mask she had worn for so long. "I am going to tell you something my grandmother taught me," I said quietly. "She said that people who tear others down are always the ones who feel smallest inside. She said that cruelty is weakness pretending to be strength, and she said that the truth always, always comes out in the end." I looked at the urn I had brought with me, the replacement I had purchased after Patricia destroyed the first one, the urn I had insisted on bringing despite knowing it might provoke her. My grandmother never got to see me buy my house. She never got to sit on my porch and watch the sunset. But she is here right now, watching you lose everything you thought made you powerful. And I want you to know, Patricia, I want you to really understand this. You did not break me. You made me stronger. And I am going to be living in this neighborhood, in my house on your street, for a very, very long time." The aftermath unfolded with a speed that surprised even me. Within a week, the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association Board held an emergency meeting. Patricia was not invited. She had been immediately suspended pending the results of an investigation, her access to community funds frozen, her authority stripped. The meeting was unlike any I had attended before. People actually spoke. They shared stories, some going back years, of how Patricia had targeted them, threatened them, made their lives miserable. There was the elderly couple she had harassed over the colour of their roses. There was the single mother she had fined repeatedly for her children's toys being visible from the street. There was Marcus, my neighbor, who finally told the full story of the decade he had spent being treated like an intruder in his own community. The board voted unanimously to terminate Patricia's position as president. They also voted to rescind every fine she had ever issued to me and to issue a formal apology on behalf of the community. They voted to establish a new diversity and inclusion committee to be chaired by Marcus, with the explicit purpose of ensuring that what happened to me could never happen to anyone else. But the legal consequences were even more significant. Ms. Chen filed a formal complaint with the Federal Fair Housing Authority. The investigation took 3 months, and when it concluded, Patricia Whitmore was personally fined $75,000 for fair housing violations. She was required to attend mandatory sensitivity training. She was barred from serving on any homeowners association board for the rest of her life, and she was required to issue a public apology, printed in the local newspaper, acknowledging her discriminatory behavior and asking for forgiveness from everyone she had harmed. The apology was the hardest for her, I think. I watched her read it at a community meeting, her voice flat, her eyes empty. Every word clearly caused her physical pain, but she read it, every single word, while I sat in the front row and watched. Her house went up for sale a month later. She could not bear to stay, could not bear to walk past my home every day, could not bear to live in a community that no longer feared her. I heard through the neighborhood network that she moved to another state, where presumably she would try to rebuild her kingdom somewhere else, but she would do so with a public record of discrimination following her, with her name in databases that future communities could search, with the truth finally attached to her legacy. I stayed. Of course I stayed. I had fought too hard to leave, sacrificed too much, endured too much. My house became my home in a way it never had been before, because now I knew that I had earned my place here not just with money but with courage. Marcus became one of my closest friends. We sat on our respective porches in the evenings, watching the sun go down, talking about everything and nothing. He told me that he had never believed he would see Patricia fall, that he had resigned himself to simply outlasting her. But you changed everything, he said. You showed everyone that fighting back was possible. The neighborhood changed in ways both visible and invisible. People actually talk to each other now, across the invisible lines that Patricia had drawn. Block parties became integrated. Children played together regardless of what their parents looked like. The rigid uniformity that had once defined Meadowbrook began to soften, replaced by something that felt more like genuine community. I think about my grandmother every day. I think about what she would say if she could see me now, living in my home, respected by my neighbors, working alongside Ms. Chen on cases that help other people facing the same discrimination I faced. I think she would be proud. I know she would be proud. But more than that, I think she would be relieved. She spent her whole life worrying about me, protecting me, trying to prepare me for a world that she knew would not always be kind. She did not live to see me overcome the biggest challenge I had ever faced, but she gave me everything I needed to face it. Her strength became my strength. Her voice became my voice. Her refusal to be broken became my refusal to be broken. The urn sits on my mantle now in a place of honor, where the morning light catches it just right. Sometimes I talk to her, tell her about my day, ask for advice even though I know she cannot answer. But somehow in those moments I feel like she is listening. I feel like she knows. To everyone who has ever been told they do not belong, I need you to hear this. The people who try to diminish you are always the ones who are most afraid of what you represent. Your existence challenges their worldview, threatens their power, exposes the fragility of their superiority. They attack you not because you are weak, but because you are strong in ways they cannot understand. Document everything. Keep records, take photographs, save messages. Build your case carefully and quietly. Find allies who believe in you, mentors who will guide you, communities who will stand with you. The law is often on your side, even when it feels like the whole world is against you. And never, never, never let anyone make you ashamed of who you are, where you come from, or what your family sacrificed to give you the life you have. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own struggles or gave you hope for your own future, then please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below with your own experiences. Let us build a community of people who refuse to be silenced, who support each other, who believe that justice is possible even when it seems impossibly far away. And remember, always remember that the people who try to tear you down only have power if you let them. You are stronger than their cruelty. You are more valuable than their opinions. You are exactly who you are supposed to be. And no one, absolutely no one, can take that from you.